You're standing in the opulent halls of Versailles in 1745, admiring the breathtaking jewelry collection of one of history's most powerful queens. The diamonds sparkle like captured starlight, the emeralds gleam with an otherworldly green fire, and then your gaze falls upon something that makes your blood freeze in your veins. There, nestled among priceless gems and precious metals, are rows of human teeth, yellowed, stained, and unmistakably real, fashioned into the most macabre royal accessories ever conceived. Before we dive into this forgotten tale of vanity turned monstrous, if you're fascinated by the dark secrets hidden within royal history, smash that like button and subscribe for more shocking stories from the past. And please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredible that we can explore these disturbing historical mysteries together from every corner of the globe. What you're about to discover isn't just another story of royal excess. This is the tale of how beauty standards, desperation, and absolute power collided to create one of the most grotesque fashion statements in European history. The queen at the center of this nightmare might surprise you, but her obsession with maintaining her appearance led to practices so disturbing that even her own courtiers whispered in horror behind closed doors. Let me introduce you to the woman who would transform human suffering into royal splendor. She wasn't born into madness. In fact, her early life suggested she might become one of the most enlightened rulers of her generation. When she first arrived at court, observers noted her intelligence, her genuine concern for the common people, and her remarkable ability to navigate the treacherous waters of European politics. But power has a way of corrupting even the most promising souls, and by the time she reached middle age, something fundamental had shifted in her psyche. Maybe it was the constant pressure of maintaining her position in a world where queens could be discarded for younger, prettier rivals. Maybe it was the isolation that comes with being surrounded by people who tell you only what you want to hear, or maybe it was simply the realization that her greatest weapon, her legendary beauty, was beginning to fade. You see, in 18th century Europe, a queen's physical appearance wasn't just about vanity. It was political currency, diplomatic leverage, and quite literally a matter of survival. A beautiful queen could secure alliances, influence treaties, and maintain her husband's devotion. But a queen whose looks had faded? She became expendable, vulnerable to younger competitors who would happily take her place. This particular monarch had built her entire identity around being the most stunning woman at court. Foreign ambassadors wrote home about her ethereal beauty, artists competed for the privilege of capturing her likeness, and poets composed verses celebrating her radiant smile. But there was one problem with that smile, a problem that would eventually drive her to acts of unthinkable cruelty. Her teeth were rotting. Now, you might think this sounds trivial, but dental hygiene in the 18th century was a nightmare for everyone, including royalty. Sugar had become fashionable among the wealthy, and the more sugar you could afford, the higher your social status. Ironically, this meant that the richest people often had the worst teeth. Black, broken, and reeking with decay, aristocratic smiles were frequently more horrifying than beautiful. For most people, bad teeth were simply an unfortunate fact of life. But for a queen whose power depended on her appearance, dental decay represented an existential threat. She watched in terror as her once perfect smile transformed into something that made courtiers look away in disgust. The woman who had once commanded rooms with her radiant presence now found herself covering her mouth when she laughed, speaking softly to minimize the sight of her deteriorating teeth. The royal physicians tried everything the medical science of the day could offer. They applied various potions and powders, attempted primitive surgical procedures, and even recommended strange dietary changes. Nothing worked. If anything, their treatments seemed to accelerate the decay, leaving the queen more desperate than ever. It was during this period of mounting desperation that someone, history doesn't record exactly who, suggested a solution so radical, so morally reprehensible, that it would define the queen's legacy forever. Why not simply replace her rotting teeth with healthy ones taken from other people? The idea wasn't entirely unprecedented. Wealthy Romans had occasionally purchased teeth from slaves and gladiators, and there were scattered reports of similar practices throughout medieval Europe. But what this queen proposed went far beyond anything previously imagined. She didn't just want a few replacement teeth, she wanted an entire collection, a royal treasury of human dental material that could be fashioned into the most elaborate and grotesque jewelry ever created. The process began with careful selection. The queen's agents scoured the kingdom looking for people with particularly beautiful teeth, straight, white, and perfectly formed. They targeted the young and the healthy, focusing especially on those who couldn't afford to refuse royal demands. Servants, peasants, and anyone dependent on royal favor found themselves subjected to horrifying dental examinations that would determine their fate. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The queen didn't just want random teeth from random people. She developed specific preferences, particular aesthetic standards that her collection had to meet. She wanted teeth from young women for their delicate appearance, teeth from healthy children for their pristine whiteness, and teeth from beautiful servants who worked within her own palace walls. Can you imagine the terror that must have gripped the royal household when word of the queen's new obsession began to spread? Suddenly, having a beautiful smile became not an asset, but a liability. Servants began deliberately staining their teeth or chipping them to appear less attractive to the royal collectors. Parents in nearby villages started warning their children to keep their mouths closed around strangers, fearing that a perfect smile might mark them for a fate worse than death. The extraction process was medieval in its brutality. Without anesthesia or proper surgical techniques, victims were simply held down while court physicians used primitive tools to wrench healthy teeth from their mouths. Many died from infection or blood loss. Those who survived were left permanently disfigured, unable to eat properly or speak clearly, their lives forever altered to satisfy one woman's vanity. But the queen's madness didn't stop at simple tooth extraction. She commissioned the finest jewelers in Europe to transform her collection of human teeth into elaborate accessories. Necklaces strung with molars, earrings dangling with canines, and brooches featuring intricate patterns of incisors and bicuspids. Each piece was a masterwork of craftsmanship and a monument to human cruelty. The most disturbing aspect wasn't just the physical suffering she caused, but the psychological torture of her victims. Many of the people whose teeth she collected were forced to continue serving in her presence, watching her wear their stolen body parts as symbols of wealth and power. The queen's courtiers found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. They were expected to compliment her new jewelry, to admire the craftsmanship, and express wonder at her innovative fashion sense. But how do you praise a necklace made from the teeth of people you've watched suffer? How do you smile and nod when your monarch parades around wearing the dental remains of servants who once served you dinner? Some tried to voice subtle objections, suggesting perhaps that traditional gems might be more appropriate for state occasions. These brave souls quickly discovered that questioning the queen's tooth jewelry was tantamount to treason. Several courtiers who expressed even mild concern found themselves banished from court, their properties confiscated, their families stripped of royal protection. The international reaction was swift and horrified. Foreign ambassadors wrote detailed reports back to their home countries, describing the queen's grotesque accessories with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. European courts began whispering about the Tooth Queen, and diplomatic relations grew increasingly strained as other monarchs struggled to maintain cordial relationships with someone they viewed as fundamentally deranged. But perhaps most chilling of all was how the queen herself seemed to revel in the fear her jewelry inspired. She would deliberately choose her most elaborate tooth accessories for important state functions, watching with obvious pleasure as foreign dignitaries struggled to maintain their composure. She began hosting special dinner parties where guests were required to compliment her collection, turning human suffering into macabre entertainment for the aristocratic elite. The queen's obsession reached its peak during a grand ball celebrating a military victory. For this occasion, she commissioned her most ambitious piece yet, a complete dental crown crafted entirely from the teeth of children under the age of 12. The centerpiece featured a perfectly preserved set of baby teeth arranged in the shape of a flower, surrounded by adult molars that had been polished to an unnatural shine. As she made her grand entrance wearing this horrific crown, the ballroom fell into stunned silence. Even courtiers who had grown accustomed to her dental jewelry were shocked by this latest creation. Foreign ambassadors later reported that several guests actually fainted at the sight, while others made hasty excuses to leave early, rather than continue witnessing what they described as a scene from hell itself. But the queen's reign of dental terror couldn't last forever. The people whose teeth she had stolen began to organize, sharing their stories and building networks of support. Families of victims started documenting the atrocities, creating detailed records of who had suffered and how. Religious leaders began speaking out against what they called an abomination before God, arguing that desecrating human bodies for vanity was a sin that demanded divine punishment. The beginning of the end came when the queen made a fatal miscalculation. She decided to expand her collection by targeting the teeth of noble children, sons and daughters of powerful aristocratic families who had previously considered themselves safe from her predatory collectors. This proved to be the mistake that would ultimately destroy her. When the Duke of Montrose discovered that his 7-year-old daughter had been selected for dental extraction, he didn't just object, he organized a full-scale revolt. Within weeks, a coalition of outraged nobles had formed, united by their horror at the queen's practices and their determination to end her reign of terror. The revolution that followed wasn't just about political power, it was a moral uprising against the systematic dehumanization that the tooth jewelry represented. Angry crowds stormed the palace, not primarily seeking treasure or political prisoners, but specifically hunting for the queen's collection of dental accessories. They wanted to destroy every necklace, every earring, every crown that had been crafted from human suffering. The queen's final public appearance was as grotesque as everything else about her story. As revolutionary forces closed in on the palace, she appeared on her balcony wearing every piece of tooth jewelry she owned simultaneously, a ghastly display that covered her from head to toe in human dental remains. Witnesses described her as looking like some nightmare creature from the deepest pits of hell, a monster adorned with the suffering of hundreds of innocent victims. Her end came swiftly after that. The revolutionary tribunal that tried her didn't spend much time debating her guilt. The evidence was literally hanging around her neck. But even in death, the queen's obsession with her dental collection continued. Her final request was to be buried wearing her favorite tooth necklace, a demand that was denied by executioners, who insisted that the human remains be returned to surviving family members for proper burial. The aftermath revealed the true scope of her crimes. Palace records showed that over 800 people had suffered dental extractions for the queen's collection, with nearly 200 dying from complications. Entire families had been destroyed, communities traumatized, and countless lives forever altered to feed one woman's vanity. Today, most history books gloss over this horrific chapter, preferring to focus on more palatable aspects of royal excess. But the story of the Tooth Queen serves as a chilling reminder of what happens when absolute power meets absolute narcissism. It shows us how quickly human dignity can be discarded when those in authority decide that their desires matter more than other people's basic humanity. The next time you see glittering royal jewels in a museum or admire the luxury of historical palaces, remember that behind all that beauty often lies a darker truth. Remember the servants who lost their teeth, the children who suffered in silence, and the families who paid the ultimate price for one woman's monstrous vanity. Their story deserves to be told, their suffering acknowledged, and their sacrifice never forgotten.